What's good, everybody? My name is Alckemy. Welcome to the channel. Today we are going to be taking a look at how to make a bass that sounds like this. As you may or may not have guessed, it's based off of Koan Sound. They are probably my biggest inspiration leading up to this and my sound design journey. And there have been so many tricks that I've learned that just by kind of taking inspiration from this, it's taught me how to make so many other different kinds of timbres within bass. The main points of this bass are deceptively simple. They have a few key characteristics, including using filtering in certain frequency ranges, distorting, and then from there it becomes a process of rinse and repeat until you get something cool. So definitely make sure that you guys are subscribed. Help me get to 10,000 subs. Let's go ahead and figure out how to make this bass. So here is the patch, and it's actually pretty simple, but I'm going to show you a lot of cool little tricks that even if you don't like this bass in particular, you'll most likely be able to do in your own sound design anyways. So I'm going to turn everything off, and then we will look at each effect one by one, and then we will get on with how to make a patch like this. Back in the day in 2014 and 2013, it was all about, dogsonacid.com and resampling and figuring out how to do frequency splitting. And thankfully, with a wonderful program like Faceplant, we are able to do that very easily just from using either a snap-in or multipass or something of the sort. So our source sound is actually something that I pulled from a wavetable, which I'll be releasing pretty soon. It sounds like this. And something that you might notice is that every time I hit a note, the sampler is actually playing in a different place. And what I've done is added a randomizer over here, and that changes the starting point of the playhead, which can be pretty interesting at times, especially if you've got a really phasey Reese. Now, I wanted to make a point with this because it doesn't really matter whether or not you use a sample or if you use a wavetable or FM or something. You kind of just want a chunky waveform in general. So for example, there's also this. And I'll show you the before and after from both at the end of the video as well. With that, we pretty much are going along the standard protocol of starting off with a notch filter. And again, this is being randomized with these modulators down here. And then we are going to add some distortion, which is automatically going to make everything a lot more beefy. And the whole point of this is we're trying to stack harmonics, but then cut them and then stack and then cut. And that creates a more complex kind of like vowel shaper, if that makes sense. We have another instance of notch filtering, and you'll see that this is a relatively common theme throughout, but it sounds like this. Now, the big difference between these two and why I chose to go for two notches is you'll see that these are actually focused on different frequency ranges here. So it's not something that you have to do, and you can even switch this into a boost if you want on the low mids, but there's not really a right or wrong. It's just kind of a matter of being mindful about what frequency ranges you choose to filter. I'll have more info on that in a later video, but for now, let's go ahead and keep going. So for the next piece of the puzzle, we have a typical neuro bass, like quote unquote setup, and this is something that I do in just about every bass that I make. We have a frequency split from low to mid to high. Over here on the left, I've actually turned this down a little bit, and that's because the distortion is affected by the input signal. So if you reduce the gain a bit, then sometimes you can actually pull more distortion out of it without it kind of like making the sound just a square wave. Sometimes you can't. It's something to kind of play around with, but if you find yourself adding too much distortion, then you might want to try to turn the input gain right before it down and to see if you can like make that blend a little bit easier. From there, it is just a little bit of overdrive, and then we're going to go into the low band where I'm randomizing a high pass filter. And there's also some drive because we're using the nonlinear filter. I love that this one in particular has a lot of different distortion units attached to the filter. I wish that they were available on their own, but it's better than nothing. In that same sense, we have on the middle band a little bit of gain reduction, and then I'm going to show you this other thing that I have set up, which is pretty simple. It's just a band pass, but it has a mix on it. Now, the reason why I did it this way is because if you use a mix like a band pass on slice EQ, then it's not actually going to reduce the filter all the way, even if the mix is at 0. So if you do it with this, you can kind of set up the frequency range and then also set the mix so that way you're morphing between a band pass and then also a clean signal. And that way it won't take away too much of the sound. And you can already hear that it's starting to get some more vocal timbres that we're looking for. That's kind of the name of the game with this, and being mindful of where things kind of create a vowel is really how you get really cool stuff, especially if you've seen my How to Bite Skrillex video. With this in particular, we're focusing on the low mids, and we're morphing between these different notches and boosts here to try to create something that has a little bit more low boomy sounds. And that's using this boost right here. That's how you kind of get that whoa. So from there, we're going to kind of try to mitigate some of the high resonant points that you have from the second boost right here. And we're just going to grab a filter that is going to be in opposition of that. So we're using the same randomizer and that's pitting it up against each other. Now that's a lot of cutting. So kind of like, as I said before, with the theme, we are going to bring some of that back with a little bit of distortion. And then we are going to skip the reverb and go straight into the phaser. Now with the phaser, I turn the spread down and just kind of focus on the cutoff. The phaser is essentially, in a lot of cases, not exactly, but it's kind of like a comb filter. So if you kind of just sweep some certain frequency ranges, then it can give you a really cool effect. Finally, with the midband, we're going to finish up with the frequency shifter, and this is just going to kind of make it kind of warp or twist a little bit more. Now in the high band, we just have a low pass filter that is being automated, and then we are supplying that with a little bit of fuzz distortion via the Faturator. Then finally, we've got one more rack over here with the multipass where we are doing a little bit of reverb automation on the high band and then another low pass filter, and that's going to help everything kind of open and close and make it seem like it has a breath. That's probably one of the biggest differences that you have, and I would say that if you're learning bass, then get comfortable with figuring out how to apply reverb on your mid and high frequency range and leaving the low signal alone, and then use a low pass filter to try to cut in between all of that. The last thing that we have aside from the limiter is just a dynamics here, and this is kind of serving as like a very soft OTT. I'm just boosting the quiet sounds of this via a compressor, and you kind of want to leave it subtle because if you push it too hard, you're going to get some like really nasty ringing sounds that is very common within OTT and Ableton, so be subtle with it. But once you have all that, that's pretty much the patch. The only other thing that I would say to kind of give a shot is that if you have the speed of everything mapped to a single macro, then you can actually use a note here and set the center point to whatever, whatever bass you're trying to make a tune in. And then whenever you actually use a pitch wheel, it's going to make the filter speed move faster or slower depending on the pitch. So if I go slow, you can see that everything slows down, and if I go faster, then you can see that it actually makes everything more quicker, and it's kind of pseudo simulating a sampler type deal when you are messing with the pitch speed or the playback speed of an actual sample itself. So one thing that I forgot to mention is that with this effect processing rack, or the way that you process bass, it kind of makes the source sound a little bit more obsolete. Like, it will matter as far as the timbre, but if you were to take something like I demonstrated before, say something like this wavetable, then it's still going to sound pretty cool. But the key characteristics of making it kind of have that classical, like, deep neuro sound are the distortion and the filtering, and then kind of being a little bit tasteful with what frequency ranges you sweep. So that's pretty much it, guys. Happy New Year. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this one. This is probably the bass that I spend the most time doing, but if you guys enjoy this kind of content, then let me know with a like, a comment, and help me get to 10,000 subs. Otherwise, I'll see you in the next one. Feel free to leave me any kind of suggestions that you have for future basses that you want me to cover. See you guys later.